Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning into the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenour, and it's going to be another fantastic episode today. I appreciate everyone joining me. Hope everyone had a good week. I've had, finally moved out of my apartment officially, but I can't get into my new place until the 5th of August. So this episode is actually being recorded at a friend's house. So to my friends allowing me to record here, I thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. Now, today's episode is going to be a jam-packed one because I'll first be jumping into some recaps of the games on Thursday, July 30th, along with some stat updates and where some guys sit in the leaderboards and some standing updates as well. I'll then get into some of this COVID-19 cancellations that have been happening and some news on the latest positive testing from the Marlins and other teams. A very interesting story that seems to just develop each and every single day. Afterwards, I'll get into my next divisional breakdown, talking about the AL Central now and the teams I see finishing atop the standings in that division, and then stay around for the final few minutes, folks, for my 10 players to watch for this season and which players I think could make some major impacts not only on this season but also for their career as a whole. So I want to get into kind of some things that went on in Thursday's games, some low-scoring games, one game that wound up in extra innings, some down-to-the-wire games, but nonetheless some really, really good action. So the first game I want to get into is the Red Sox-Mets, and the Sox finally bounced back from a very slow start, beating the Mets 4-3. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but I was absolutely floored over the weekend that the Orioles took 2 of 3 from the Red Sox. Now, I know that the season is early, I get it, but still, that the Orioles are coming out ready to swing in that first series of the season, that is pretty incredible, and especially when they're going up against the Red Sox. Now, it was a big late inning kind of ordeal with the Red Sox-Mets game. Red Sox and Mets went into the 9th inning tied, and then the Red Sox scored that deciding run in the top of the 9th inning. Alex Verdugo continues his very strong start, went 2 for 4, raised his average to a .333 clip. J.D. Martinez, though, continuing to not really produce like he normally does. Went a mere 1 for 5 from the plate. His OPS is not even at 700 this year. And for a guy that has had a 900 or higher OPS in the last 6 seasons, that's not a great sign. Now, again, he can start to get it going soon, and who knows, maybe he starts picking it up by the 3rd week or so, and he has, an incredible, second half of the season. But it is a good sign that the Sox were able to disrupt the Mets bullpen and bring in that late run. A good sign that this team can close out games and really pull out ahead when they need to in those do-or-die moments. Now, a big, big moment happened on Thursday for Shane Bieber. He actually tied a record that has not been touched since 1954. Most strikeouts between the first 2 starts of the season for a pitcher. And he had another incredible outing, this time a 13 strikeout inning, one against the Minnesota Twins, and incredible start for him. Got the win against the Twins 2-0. Cleveland is off to a very hot start, 5-2 on the year. So, if I'm a fan of the Indians right now, I am very happy. I would not become complacent, though, and I would not get, a little, too ahead of myself, but I would say that I would be very, very pleased with how my team was playing if I was an Indians fan. But again, I'll go more into Shane Bieber later on in the show, but I really think that he has the potential to be an elite pitcher for a long, long time. He only has given up 3 hits this year. The Twins could have, their hands seriously full in this Central. I know that, and again, I'll get into the AL Central breakdown later on, but, the Twins do seem kind of like that top-tier team, but the Indians, they're off to just as good of a start, if not better, than Minnesota, and that could mean a little bit of trouble for the Twins down the road. So we'll hear about, the Twins, the Indians, and the White Sox, 3 teams that I think are going to battle it out atop the standings for sure. Now, San Diego and San Francisco came down into extra innings. But San Diego came out scorching hot. I mean, they've come out scorching hot in the season, but they came out scorching hot in extra innings, wound up defeating the Giants 12-7. Now, this is a team that has struggled the last few years. I mean, the Padres have not been that great, but starting 5-2 so far, taking down the Giants in extra innings, a great beginning to this season for them. Fernando Tatis Jr. went 2 for 5 on the day, keeping his average right under 300. He's flirting with 1,000 OPS right now. So again, he's on the verge of having a huge year for himself. Machado, though, Manny Machado, he has struggled mightily from the plate, only hitting .222. He struck out twice on Thursday. But a guy to keep note of, and I did not mention him in my 10 players to watch for this season, and I'm kind of mad that I didn't, because it's kind of a nice redemption story, if you will, after the year that he had last year, or the ending, I guess, if you will. Trent Grisham, I mean, he's been a big piece in making, this Padres team this successful so far, hitting .296 right now with a 1.017 OPS, went 2 for 6 on Thursday. I mean, he had a pretty tough time in the final game last year in the NL wild card game. He's for people who don't know, he is the outfielder that let the ball go underneath his glove for the Brewers, and the Nationals ultimately won that game, and they would go on to win the World Series. So, not saying that he had anything directly to do with it, but that was a very big moment. That was a very pivotal moment in the game. So he seems to have shaken off last year's ending, and he's looking to pick it up this year for sure. And I think he's already started to do that a little bit. And if he can keep that going with him and Fernando Tatis and Will Myers, and Machado kind of gets things going. I mean, he doesn't need to necessarily hit, 300 or 295. If he's hovering around 270, 275, Machado's got a lot of pop in his bat. So as long as he's keeping those slugging percentages up and that OPS up for the most part, you just need to keep the strikeouts down. That's the biggest thing in this whole, ordeal. If Machado can keep his strikeouts down and really try and emphasize, getting on base and getting walks, I think that he can start to bounce back from this slow start he's having. But nonetheless, I really think that the Padres could be a team that, come fall time, come playoff time, we might be hearing a lot more about, because they might be in the thickets of the playoffs. Now, in the next game, Nats taking down the Jays 6-4 in D.C. Washington handed Hyun Jin Ryu his first loss as a Blue Jays, which it was very weird how this all kind of worked, because, as we all know, Toronto does not have a stadium to play at right now. Well, they have one getting ready in Buffalo, but until then, they did not have a stadium. So as a result, they basically had to play in D.C. the other night as the home team, which I couldn't even imagine that. That has to be so weird. I mean, that has to be so weird. You're going to an opposing team's stadium, and you're the home team. That's got to be just so odd. But anyways, the Nationals did a nice job on Hyun Jin Ryu. I mean, he gave up 9 hits. He gave up 5 runs. Starlin Castro with a huge day for the Nationals, went 4 for 5, he's batting .360 this year, .905 OPS. Really great start for him, and hopefully he can keep that up, because this Nats team is missing, a big bat like they had last year in Anthony Rendon. So maybe Castro will step up as, that new power hitter in this lineup. Now, another name to make note of, and I think that, again, it might be a little bit early on in his career, but I think down the road we're going to hear a lot more about this player. Carter Kieboom, great player, young guy, 22 years old, call-up from last year. He started off very, very well, batting .444 so far. He went 2 for 2 against the Jays. Nationals are off to a decent start, 3-4, not a great record, not a horrible record to have through the first week of the season, but if you're hovering around that 500 mark and then you get hot at that right time of the season, I mean, I would take that, 3-4 start and then eventually work your way into a much better record as the season goes on than a quick 5-2, 6-1 start, and then you just start to fizzle out towards the end. So we'll see how the Nationals continue to move forward from, this point going forward, and how they really, build off of last year's World Series win. Some stats updates and looking at the leaderboards for a couple categories. One thing for, who's been leading the home run category, Teoscar Hernandez leads all hitters in home runs with 4, coming off back-to-back 20-plus home run seasons. So with a shortened season, it's very ideal for him. I mean, he's a prime candidate for somebody who could very well lead the league in home runs, a guy that floats around that 20 to 25 home run mark. And honestly, that this year, if somebody is hitting that many home runs, that's going to be a pretty big total for these guys. I mean, especially for 60 games, because hitting 30, 40 home runs in a 60-game span is very unlikely. Highly unlikely, I should say. 20 to 25, though, that's pretty reasonable. I mean, that is, for the most part, I think the most kind of, or one of the higher-end home run totals that we will see out of guys this year, because they don't have that much time. They just don't have that much time. Guys aren't going to have that, as many at-bats as they normally would. So there's not going to be as many opportunities. And with how baseball is as a sport in a whole, a sport based on failure, you're obviously not going to go up every 2 or 3 at-bats and hit a home run. I mean, unless, you're just on some sort of unbelievably historic run. But nonetheless, great start so far for Teoscar Hernandez. And then Christian Vazquez, catcher for the Red Sox, he's also had himself a pretty good start, tying Teoscar with 4 home runs in the leaderboard. He's off to a great start, batting .421 on the year. Really good sign for the Red Sox. I mean, they lost a lot in the offseason. So to have him in the lineup to, kind of, I don't want to say fill the void, but he's definitely picking up the slack that J.D. Martinez has, definitely not performed to the level that he usually is. Mookie Betts no longer with the team. How will Jackie Bradley Jr. hit this year? How will Xander Bogaerts hit this year? How will Rafael Devers hit this year? Devers, I think, and I've mentioned before, is one of the better young players in the league. And I think that for a long, long time, Verdugo and Devers, if the Red Sox can keep them both around, I think it's just going to be, only a matter of time before we start seeing the Red Sox again in a very deep postseason situation. So keep your eye out on the Red Sox for the future. I mean, obviously right now they are still a good, legitimate ball team. I'm not taking that away from them, but just give it a couple years when these guys start to really develop and start to really mature and they start to really improve their skills. That's when we're going to start seeing a huge progression and a huge jump for this Red Sox team, no question about it. Nelson Cruz, again, off to an unbelievable start. The 40-year-old still doing it. I don't know how he does it. Leading the league in RBIs with 11. He's already got double-digit RBIs through 6 games. I mean, that's an unbelievable. And again, I know we already talked about one record that's been tied at least with Shane Bieber, but who knows what kind of record Nelson Cruz might be approaching or could have surpassed, because 11 RBIs in a 6-game span, that is pretty. I mean, that's pretty much 2 run scoring that you're driving in per game for an entire week. And if that is not a hot start, then I don't know what is. That's a very, very good beginning to this year for Nelson Cruz. And again, this has got to be one of the best starts of his career by far. Nick Castellanos sitting at tied for 3rd with 8 RBIs, and Vazquez, again, in that top of the category with 8 RBIs himself also. So, again, 2 guys to make note of and to keep an eye out for, especially Nick Castellanos. And I'm going to mention him later on in the show. He is a very talented hitter. I think he's one of the best extra base hit guys in the MLB. I think he does an unbelievable job at trying to drive in, not only as many runs, but get on base in that scoring position. Like I said, big doubles guy, gets in those big scoring positions. And, for a Reds team that this year, they could make a legitimate run at the playoffs, that's a huge addition. I mean, that's a ginormous addition. He honestly, now that I think about it, he reminds me a little bit of an Anthony Rendon. Not to the exact and not to the extreme, but Castellanos, he can do very similar things that Rendon can do. A power-hitting infielder that does a really, really nice job of, big hits. And again, that's what baseball is nowadays. Big, big hits. And that's what Castellanos does, just like Rendon. So 2 very similar players, I think. Now, the awkward thing with the batting average leaders is Miguel Rojas currently leads the league with a 700 batting average. But again, he won't be playing until next week, being on the Marlins. And so an average that is semi-inflated because of the early part of the season, and, with a guy going 10 or 7 for 10 through his, first couple at-bats of the season, it's obviously going to be a little bit higher. Obviously, his batting average is going to, be a little bit over-exaggerated, if you will, just because there's a small sample size, and he has done well in that small sample size. I will not take anything away from him in that sense. But, again, if you've got a guy that's still producing below Miguel Rojas at a similar rate and continuing on because his team gets to keep on playing, but he can't surpass that 700 mark, obviously, because that is just a very hard thing to achieve. And most of the time in the beginning of the season, you do see these inflated batting averages. You do see guys with 500 averages or 600 averages. And as the season goes on, it goes down a little bit, obviously, because that's just very unrealistic in baseball. But with the small amount of at-bats that Miguel Rojas has had had so far, it does make it difficult for guys below him to try and meet that mark. And that's the issue is, if even though he might be a leader in the board and might be atop the standings for, the top batting average in the league, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's, the best hitter or has the best average, in my opinion, necessarily, because he's only had a certain sample size, and because his sample size is now going to dwindle down even more because of the less games he's going to be playing. That is going to throw some things off for other guys, and other guys that are going to be able to play every single day and going to be able to get at-bats and be able to go on, up to the plate and get it done. And unfortunately, with just how the season has been going and with these cancellations, which I will move into in a little bit, it's posed a massive issue. It's posed a big-time nightmare. Now, over to some pitching categories. Shane Bieber, as no shock, leads the MLB in strikeouts with 27. A very strong start for Bieber, who, like I mentioned before, I'm really excited to see how he plays this year and really going forward. And he's making a case to be really the ace for the Indians. And with numbers like that, he can definitely make that happen. He can definitely be a legitimate ace option, a number one option, and I'm really, really excited to see how his career kind of unfolds moving forward. Now, Bieber is also in a four-way tie atop the leaderboard for ERA with a clean 0 ERA, so again, shows his dominance that he's had so far, and these pitchers are only making a fraction of the starts that they normally would, just like these batters are only going to take a fraction of the at-bats that they normally would. So, in Bieber's case, if he's able to dominate we'll say on average an MLB pitcher in a 162-game season, he starts maybe around 25, 30 games, I would say, somewhere around there. Okay, I'm going to give that a little ballpark. This year, probably half that. I would say probably around 15, 18 or so. Bieber could very well have a 10-win season, an 11-win season. He could have a very high strikeout season. He's already got 2 back-to-back strikeout outings. He's on his way to, I don't want to say a 200 strikeout season because he's very capable of that, but he's on his way to at least 100, 125. If he's really, really dealing this year, 150. I think that this year the benchmark for him for strikeouts in the season is going to be around 120. That might be a little bit aggressive, but I really think that with the start that he's having, and if he keeps this going, he's going to get that mark for sure. Joe Jimenez leading the league in saves with 4 right now. A really solid closer who, as I'll mention later in the show, is somewhat, new to this main closer job. He did have some work last year as Detroit's closer, but he's moved into that main closer spot now, and he's done a nice job so far. He's got a 2.25 ERA and 4 innings of work so far. So, the Tigers, they're off to a decent start, 4-3, and they're getting things done for the most part, which I'm actually pretty shocked by because this is a team that tends to, really, really struggle throughout the entire season. So with them coming out to a pretty good start, this might be a year where maybe they bubble to the surface a little bit. Who knows? But with these standings, it's I don't want to say that it was obvious to see some of these standings, but the Yankees are atop the leaderboard in the AL East. They're 4-1 this year. Rays are 4-3. They're second. Boston sitting at 3-4. Toronto's 3-4, and Baltimore's now 2-3. So that's kind of the AL East. And then the Central, I'm kind of shocked that the Indians are in first place, but I'm not shocked that the Twins are right behind them. I will say the shocking thing is that Chicago is in last place. And again, I'll get into my breakdown of the AL Central in a little bit, but that in itself is very shocking to me because I would have thought that Chicago would come out to a little bit of a better start. They do have a lot of guys that are in slumps right now, so hopefully they can get the ball rolling here sooner rather than later. Now, the AL West seems to be very evenly spread across the first 3 teams. Houston and Oakland are both tied for first at 3-3, and then Seattle is 3-4. So, the Mariners are even right there knocking on the door, making a case to potentially, maneuver their way into that second place spot. Down in the NL East, Miami is first in the NL because of the win percentage. They're 2-1, but they've played not nearly as many games as the Braves, the Mets, the Nationals, and the Phillies have also played the same amount of games. But still, because we're going off of winning percentage this year, now it looks really weird because Atlanta clearly has a better record, 4-3 as opposed to Miami's 2-1. But because Miami has played less games and have won more of those less games, now their winning percentage is again ballooned a little bit, just like how I said Miguel Rojas' batting average will be a little bit ballooned. Same exact deal, and that is the problem right there. And there's nothing we can do. There's nothing anybody really can do. But the issue right there is how are we going to look at this? Because looking at it right now, it's really weird seeing a 2-1 team team sitting in first place. And so what if down the road, couple games, couple weeks into the season, we start seeing guys that are, winning only, 15 games or something like that, but they have a 15-8 record, but because they've canceled a lot of their games because of COVID-19 restrictions and COVID-19 outbreaks, so on and so forth, that's going to look really weird because there might be a team that's, 30 and 12 or whatever. And because that, their winning percentage might not be as high as the team that's 15-8, they're now going to be in second place, and it's just going to look really, really weird. The NL Central, again, for the most part, Cubs and Brewers are atop the leaderboard in that. I'm actually shocked that the Reds have come out to such a slow start. I thought that they would come out to a much quicker start, much more dominating start, because, again, all of those additions that they had in the offseason. Now, could I see them start making their way up the leaderboard? Absolutely. I could see them surpassing St. Louis right now, who they're currently sitting behind. I could see them maybe getting up to where Milwaukee is. Milwaukee, they're off to an okay start. They're 3-3, sitting at a 500 average. They've been all right. Watching their games the last couple of days, I've noticed that a lot of the hitting is not there. Now, Castiano did have an incredible couple games against Pittsburgh, but Christian Yelich has been struggling mightily from the plate, really, really bad. And their base running, a little bit of a question mark. I mean, a couple guys got thrown out at home plate the last couple days against the Pirates. So, again, I don't want to say that anybody is out, but the Brewers, again, and as myself as a fan, it does worry me a little bit that there was a couple games that we struggled against the Pirates, and that is a big worry for me. But, again, season's early. They've only played 6 games, so we'll see how things go moving forward. Now, out in the West, again, very, very odd. Colorado is 4-1. And L.A. and San Diego are sitting at second place with a 5-2 record. And again, we're going off of winning percentage now. So it's an 800 winning percentage for Colorado as opposed to L.A. and San Diego that have a 714 winning percentage. That's going to be a big factor. And again, I'm going to get into more about it in my next segment, but that's going to be a very interesting thing to look at if you're a fan, if you're an observer, if you're analyzing whatever and looking at this MLB season, you're going to notice that there's something a little odd about, how the records don't really add up with the placement in the standings, and it's really all based off of, winning percentage, obviously. So, folks, that's going to close it out for me in our first segment today. Thanks so much for listening. Don't go anywhere because after the quick break, I'll be back discussing our topic for segment 2, which will be how the MLB is going to continue to respond to these outbreaks and, a little bit of an update on the Miami Marlins outbreak and anything else with some other teams, and really how we're going to go forward with this whole standing situation, winning percentage, so on and so forth. It's going to be a very interesting topic talking about these COVID-19 cancellations. So stick around, folks. Don't go anywhere because we'll be right back on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, everyone, to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour again, and segment 1 was centered around recaps from July 30th game, some standing updates, some statistical rankings for players with the season being just a little over a week old. Don't go anywhere after this segment, everyone, because later on in the show, I'll be sharing my top 10 players to watch this season and who I think could really have a breakout year and really set themselves up for a long, successful career. I want to dive into a little update on this Miami Marlins situation that really has been just running rampant in the MLB world, and what's going to be happening going forward for the Marlins and really the entire league. So in recent news, and really a continuing story to this day, the Miami Marlins have had a big issue on their hands this past week or so. On Sunday, July 26th, the Miami Marlins had about 3 to 4 members of their team test positive for COVID-19. The next day is where the snowball began to roll, and this is where I heard little murmurs about a couple players testing positive, but once Monday hit, that was big news. That was, atomic news, really. I mean, especially with how running rampant this virus has been and how this pandemic has been going, hearing the news on Monday was kind of shocking. So Monday, they find out that 8 more players and 2 traveling personnel members test positive as well. So in a matter of 24 hours, you now have 14 people that have contracted the virus. And again, that is a perfect example of how quickly this thing spreads, and that is what everyone's fear is. This is a literal physical example of what happens when one person gets it and then they just spread it to the entire locker room. So after the announcements of this, it prompted the Marlins, obviously, the next game in Miami against the Orioles to be canceled, and the New York Yankees and the Philadelphia Phillies actually also decided to cancel their game because the Phillies had just come from playing Miami. So now we have a little bit of an issue on our hands. The Marlins have continued, to have players test positive, and as the numbers have risen to now 16 players that are affected as of Wednesday, July 29th, and actually today of recording on Friday, July 31st, I'm pretty sure that there was another couple players that came out positive yesterday on Thursday. So again, the fact that we're starting to hear, each and every single day that somebody, at least 1 or 2 people, are contracting the virus, that is not a good thing moving forward at all. And again, until there's no positive tests through a day-long period, the Marlins season has been put on hold until Monday, August 3rd or Tuesday, August 4th. That would be the earliest, that's the ideal target date for these teams to really return back to playing. And the Marlins are now going to play fewer games than most teams, with a week's worth of games now being canceled. And again, they don't have a whole lot of time to make things up. They don't have a whole lot of time to make up these canceled games. It will also affect other teams, not just the Marlins, the Phillies, the Nationals, the Orioles, the Yankees. Because of the cancellations of the Marlins games, now those teams have also had to cancel some games, whether it's because they've come into contact with the Marlins, or they were a team that came in contact with a team that was in contact with the Marlins. And that, again, that's the issue that we run into. It's because there's a whole line of, contact. Who did this team get in contact with? Who did they get in contact with? And then who did they go and get in contact with afterwards? It's just a trickle-down effect, and that's what we're starting to see right now. Some of these games may not be able to be made up, like I mentioned, because there's just so few days left in the season, and there's so many games that they still have to play. And the fact that the Marlins have more games left than days in the season, it just shows you that they're really not going to be able to get everything done. Now, the MLB has talked about potentially implementing a 7-inning doubleheader to fit games in. We might see that. Who knows? In all honesty, if they want to fit these games in, it may be their best bet. It may be the best opportunity because, virtually it's going to be impossible for these teams to really cram all these games in without one team somehow getting shortchanged. And that's the unfortunate thing, is that there's going to be teams that did not even, get infected or become infected with the virus or really have any sort of issues with it, but because of all the canceling of games, it's going to now seep into what's going on in their season and how it's going to affect their play. It goes beyond just somebody, being, and obviously that is the first and foremost, scariest thing, is that people are getting sick and it's spreading so rapidly. But again, it goes even further than that. Now we have all these different issues on our hands of how will games be played? Are games going to be made up? How are standings going to be looked at? How are the statistics going to be? How are we going to view, who's going to be in first place, who's going to be in second place? How are we going to divvy up this playoff thing now because we're looking at winning percentage instead of games and standings? So there's just so many different new things that are going on. It's almost like every single day there's something new that's either being changed or being reworded or being rewritten or whatever. And that is, I think, the biggest problem, is that I don't think anybody can keep up with the changes. And I think until we start to get into a little bit of a groove, and once the MLB kind of gets into a groove, and again, they can't really do what the MLB or the NBA and the NHL are doing. They can't have a bubble system. So the MLB, the NFL, leagues like that, they're going to have a little bit of a tougher time keeping people quarantined and, separated off from each other because, the traveling, the amount of people. I was talking to a couple friends of mine the other day, and I was saying, the NBA and the NHL they don't have nearly as many roster players on their roster. When you think about it, through 30 teams in the MLB, they've got, 30-plus guys or whatever that are dressing, and then they also have, traveling people and, traveling personnel, this, that, and the other. That's at least 1,500 people that are going to be playing in a, ginormous, I mean, it's thousands of people, and you can't house that many people in one place, and I don't think you can really be able to play multiple games simultaneously in an area that is, considered a bubble when the sport has to be played outside, and you can't really keep it condensed, and that's the biggest issue. So the big question, and I've mentioned it a little bit, is how will the standings be counted now? Because the fact that there are teams that are going to have fewer games, I mean, it's going to basically be all winning percentage. And instead of total wins, because it's not going to all, be accurate because of these games being nixed, how are you going to, look at a team's standings? And like I mentioned in the segment 1, how are we going to look at now in the NL East, for example? The Marlins are they're in first place. They're in first place with a 2-1 record. But Atlanta is right behind them with a 4-3 record. So many people would probably look at Atlanta's record and say, okay, they are the ones with the better record. They have more wins. Yes, they have more losses. But now the big kind of theme right there is that the Marlins have played less games, and as a result, they have a higher winning percentage, and that is what they're going off of this year. So it's going to be very interesting because there's going to be, I think, somebody at the end of the season that's going to get the raw end of the deal, and they're not going to get the fair shake of the playoffs because something like this, was completely out of their control. And, it is tough. It is probably very, very, unfortunate that because of some things that have occurred that, again, are out of pretty much everybody's control, the ramifications of that are now starting to rearrange this whole thing, and they're really starting to kind of juggle around, if you will, what they have to do and how they're going to view this season. They would ultimately have to eliminate games for everyone. I mean, and I think that would be the only solution for this, is that if they started to if anybody had to cancel a game, they just knock off a game of everybody's schedule just to keep it even. That would be ultimately the only way I think that, this could really be even, if you will, because right now it's not. And there's nothing that anybody can do, and it's not like anybody is doing this on purpose, but it's still very unfortunate to those teams that are playing just as hard and doing just as well, if not better, and now they're getting the short end of the stick or the raw end of the deal because they're not having to sit out a week or 2 weeks or whatever because of a COVID-19 outbreak in the locker room. Now, I shouldn't say no other teams now, because actually, as of yesterday, more players, except on a different team, the Philadelphia Phillies, it was only a coach and a locker room attendant, but still, now people are starting to test positive for it after the fact. And the Phillies, they haven't played the Marlins in, I don't know, a week and a half, or, I don't want to say, about a week. We'll say a week. And right there, if guys are now starting to test positive on a Thursday, and the first test came back positive on a Sunday, who knows what's going to happen on Monday? Who knows what's going to happen a couple days after that? And again, this brings me back to a point I made a few episodes ago. It's, how is this season going to go down? How will this be viewed? And right here is a prime example. If there is a team that, let's say, finishes with a higher winning percentage but didn't play as many games than a team that did play all of the games and unfortunately didn't have the higher winning percentage, now that team that, played every game feels it's unfair. The other team who played 5 or 6 games, 7 or 8 games fewer, had a greater chance at making it. Now, obviously, the team that, has fewer games would obviously still need to win and be successful this year, but in the event of that happening, you don't have to win as many games because you're not going to be playing as many games. So you don't have to worry about, a team that has to go out and play all 60 games, and they have to make sure that they meet a certain mark. If you're a team that is now playing only 50 games and you're, I don't know, couple wins away from having a 600 winning percentage and the season's almost over, you don't have as much to worry about, as opposed to a team that's got a whole lot more ground to make up because they found themselves in a 5-game losing streak 3 weeks before that. So it's going to be really odd, at the end of the year when we start seeing who's going to be making the playoffs, because I think there's going to be some teams that make the playoffs that shouldn't make the playoffs, and it's going to be all because of the winning percentage. So, and again, the frightening thing here, and I think that's, kind of one of the big worries for me, is if this, were to happen, say, to another 2 or 3 teams that have, outbreaks. I mean, right now, the Philadelphia Phillies do not have an outbreak. They right now just have a couple cases, and, obviously Juan Soto was a case for the Nationals. So teams do have, cases occurring. It is a thing. It is happening. So it's not, an unheard of thing, if you will. It's definitely happening. But if there's an outbreak like there is with the Marlins, and I think that's what the fear is that if another team, say, the Phillies, all of a sudden, whether it's, over the weekend or if it's, Monday or if it's next Wednesday and they've got 7 guys that all of a sudden have, coronavirus, now you have another issue because now you have to factor in who were they around, what teams were they around. And then, again, it's kind of like a big spider web. And it starts with the Marlins, and then it branches out to the Phillies, and then who knows where it's going to branch out to next, and then it could branch out to somewhere else after that. So, I mean, if there's an outbreak of 15 or more people on numerous other teams, this could really threaten the season. And I don't mean to sound, pessimistic or, whatever, but this could really hinder the, forward momentum of the season because if there's more outbreaks like this, Rob Manfred's going to have to do something. I mean, he has to do something. He has to take into consideration that these guys, it's their health, it's their family's health, it's everybody's health, really. And again, something's going to have to be, done if this does happen. Now, this is a sign that teams, need to take this serious. And thankfully, no one has been gravely infected by it, or even worse, has passed away. And it's mostly just been players. There's been a couple traveling personnel, obviously a locker room attendant with the Phillies, but again, mostly players, and for the most part, everyone seems to be either semi-sick, a runny nose, a scratchy throat, or asymptomatic. But teams must be aware that it's also a matter of their season. They need to take into consideration that they need to take this serious because this is do or die for this year. And if they can't follow these regulations, if they can't follow the rules, and if they can't exercise this social distancing, we might not have baseball in the next 3 weeks. We might not have baseball come game 30. They might have to say, we can't keep going forward. Too many guys are getting sick. And, again, that is a big, big thing. Think about it. The Marlins players, they aren't going to get paid for those canceled games, too. And so you factor that in, this now becomes a necessity. These guys need to play. These guys make their money off of playing. This is their job. At the end of the day, this is their occupation. And if they can't make money because these games are being canceled, yeah, it's going to be a problem, and it needs to, be addressed, obviously. But at the same time, the precaution needs to be taken. And if you're another team, if you're another team that has an issue like this, you need to not only take care of it, but you also need to articulate to other teams, this is a serious thing. We can't take this lightly. This can't be taken with a grain of salt. We have to be very, very strict on this, and I think that's what it is. I think these other teams that are having these outbreaks, they might become advocates for potential other teams that have outbreaks because they might say, hey, how did you guys go about this? How did you guys do this? How did you guys take care of, X amount of guys getting sick? Were you guys able to find out where the source was? So on and so forth. So the Marlins could actually be a big help to other teams. Hopefully this doesn't happen, but if it were to, they could be a team that teams might go and look to say, hey, what's going on? How do we take care of this? How do we go about this? And how do we fix this? Now, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's the lead, scientist and the lead, what's the word? I don't want to say, the virus guy, but, the lead, disease person. He's one of the top doctors in the nation, basically, We'll leave it at that. He made a comment in an article on ESPN that he was actually very impressed with how the MLB was handling all of this, which I found a shock. I thought that he was going to say, shame on the MLB for doing this. They should have known better, blah, 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 blah. But he said that they've done a pretty good job with all that they can do to contain the virus for the most part. And again, who knows what's going to happen moving forward in a couple days. Players on teams could begin to feel more and more uncomfortable also, and that could also be another issue. Guys could start exiting the season and saying, I don't feel comfortable playing. There's an outbreak that might occur, on more teams. I think that, I might have it. I think that, somebody on my team might have it, so on and so forth. It's probably a very unsettling feeling right now to be a professional athlete, especially in baseball with things that are going on, because you're probably every day going into the locker room, going into the clubhouse saying, I wonder who has it today. Do I have it? Does the person next to me at my locker have it? Now, they might not think about that 24/7, but that definitely is on their mind. And as a result, that might mean guys might want to exit the season. So who knows, by game 25, there's a team that's got, a couple cases, and then like 3 more guys decide to leave the team. So now you don't just have an outbreak. Now you have guys that are just wanting to not even partake at all. And that's another issue in itself. And that is not what we need right now. So again, the big thing is keep keeping guys, separated off, keeping guys in social distancing practices, but just making sure that if there is an outbreak like this, it just has to be contained. Now, this pandemic has affected quite a bit of aspects of baseball, and I will give some guys credit, that they've done a pretty good job on the bench of keeping their masks on, but, and for the most part, keeping social distancing. They've done elbow touches instead of high fives. They've done now the foot touch is the big thing now, coming out of the bullpen and coming off the field after games, and, the managers and the dugout crew all come out and, meet up with each other after a win. They all do foot fives now instead of high fives. So they're taking it seriously for the most part. I think overall they're doing a nice job. But what won't help this is brawls. And as we may know, the other night, Dodgers and Astros, they got into it, obviously, with everything that happened with the Astros and everything that came out about them, and then them obviously beating the Dodgers in a year that they were said to have been cheating. The Dodgers aren't happy, and I think a lot of players on the Dodgers, and honestly, if I was one of them, I would feel this. I feel like they felt cheated, and they definitely were, because the Astros definitely cheated. So Joe Kelly the other night for the Dodgers, did his thing, struck out Carlos Correa, and then mocked him after that, which prompted Correa to actually, start making his way towards Kelly. And it started a bench-clearing brawl, and it was an incident that ensued. Now, there was no punches thrown. Nobody was, fighting or anything like that. Joe Kelly gets handed an 8-game suspension. And now, I know that an 8-game suspension for that is way overboard, and I do not agree with the suspension at all. I think it was by far one of the most unnecessary lengths of a suspension for a player to have when not one physical act of violence was portrayed. Now, yes, he did throw at them, okay, whatever, but you know what? If you're the MLB, I feel like you have to know that's coming, especially with all that has come out with the Astros and how they pretty much cheated every single team. There's a lot of teams that don't like them, and rightfully so. So if I'm the MLB, okay, I'm not shocked by that. I totally get that. I think the two things that are really what are affecting, and kind of the driving force behind why it was an 8-game suspension is this. One, I think the MLB wants to show to players that if you're going to attempt to throw at the Astros and you're going to attempt to do something like this, and it ensues something that could cause an aftermath effect that does not include social distancing, we're going to hand you a very severe suspension because of your actions and your anger and what you're doing to try and retaliate and what it is now causing and what the reaction is. And also, they're also probably doing it because they want people to know that they're taking this serious. They want guys to make sure to stay in the dugout. They want guys to stay in the clubhouse. They don't want guys it was a massive. Everybody was out on the field, and right there was a perfect example of non-social distancing. So you go back to the original point of how are we going to take care of this? What are we going to do? Well, if Joe Kelly incited this, we kind of have to do something, and I don't think it's necessarily. I think that in a normal sense, I don't think he would have gotten an 8-game suspension. I honestly think he probably would have gotten a fine. I think maybe a $10,000 fine, maybe a $5,000, and nothing crazy. He didn't do anything wrong. Nobody threw any punches. Nobody spat on anybody. Nobody threw anything at anyone. Nobody went after anyone. It was it was just a massive conglomeration of people all hovering around home plate and just yelling and screaming. And for the most part, I think the coaches and the dugout crew and all the players that were on the bench and all the managers and all the coaches, they did a good job at keeping most of the guys away from each other just so that nothing ensued. Because again, imagine and only imagine if the day after that, 3 guys from the Dodgers get sick and then 4 or 5 guys from the Astros get COVID-19. Now it becomes a matter of neglect because something like that happened and now guys are getting sick. And so people would then say, wow, I can't believe Joe Kelly did that and he was acting so childish that it went to the level that it did, because now that there's guys that are severely sick because he wanted to throw at someone and it started a brawl and now guys got infected. Now, we haven't heard anything yet about, anybody testing positive or any sort of rampant spread that has been going on in those clubhouses. But again, if we're looking at this in the grand scheme of things, Was that suspension fair? No. Was that suspension logical? No. But at the same time, I can see where the MLB is going, and I can understand why they're doing it, because in the overarching theme of this, they want guys to be healthy, and they want the season to go on as smoothly as possible. And with this recent outbreak of the Marlins, and now with the Phillies two people in the traveling personnel for the Phillies getting it, now there's a growing worry in the baseball community. Who's the next team to get it? Is there a next team to get it? So as we go forward, we're going to have to start to see, what the MLB will do about this and what kind of precautionaries will be done. But I don't think Joe Kelly's suspension, should hold. It obviously is going to, but again, in a normal sense, he'd probably just get fined. But the MLB, they want to make sure that nobody else has an outbreak. So we'll see what happens moving forward with this whole COVID-19 cancellations. I mean, I've already seen on TV and stuff when they say why games are canceled. Now they say, COVID-19 postponement or COVID-19 cancellation, and it's just really weird. I mean, seeing a game being canceled for, not a rain delay or not thunder and lightning, but something totally, totally different. That is a new thing for me as a baseball fan, as somebody that covers baseball, somebody who talks about baseball, somebody that, goes in depth on it. It's a very, very odd thing to see. So that'll close it out here for us in the second segment, but don't go anywhere, because coming up, I'll get into my breakdown of the AL Central and share who I think can really dominate the division and come out on top at the end of the year, and who is going to have a harder time keeping up with their divisional rivals. Stay right there, everyone. We will be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back from that commercial break. Great to have you all still here with me on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour with you, and if you are just joining us, last segment was an interesting one as I broke down the Miami Marlins situation and what the outbreak in their locker room could mean for them and the rest of the MLB. I want to move into my third division breakdown. This time, we will be sticking with the AL as I did the AL East last time, but now I want to move to the AL Central, and the Central is a division that I think is pretty even for the most part, and it will definitely be a very competitive division this year with three legitimate contenders that could definitely make a case for being the division champion. Now, this is a division that last year had a great showing from two teams, and the other three didn't get higher than 75 wins. So last year you could totally see a little bit of a top-heavy feel, but this is a totally different year, and those 75 and fewer win teams from last year could pounce all over those other divisional rivals to potentially climb their way into a playoff spot. To get things started, I'll go in with who I think will be the number one team in the AL Central, and the Minnesota Twins are a team that I think could be a sleeper for the World Series. I really genuinely believe that they could seriously find themselves in that position later in the year. They aren't a clear-cut favorite like the Dodgers and the Yankees might be, but they are a team that could see, going very, very deep into the postseason because this season is so much shorter, and they are a team that really tends to fizzle out. A team that is great for the first, 90 or so games in a normal season, and then as the season starts to go on, they kind of plateau, and then they hit the playoffs, and they never get out of the ALDS. But with only 60 games, they can cover a lot of ground and go much further in the playoffs, feel much fresher than they normally would. And again, they're coming off an 100-win season. They lost in the opening round of the playoffs to the Yankees last year. They have some really, really great players that are going to be very good for a long time. Miguel Sano, who had 30-plus home runs last season, he's only 27, already been an all-star, so he's just right now in the start of his prime, Mitch Garver is a name I will continue to mention. I'm going to mention him in my next segment, and again, I've mentioned him many times before, honestly. I really do believe he's a very underrated player, had a career year last year for the Twins, batted .273, knocked in 31 home runs, was named a Silver Slugger for the catchers in the AL. He's riding that momentum, and if he can have a solid year this year, which he has started off pretty well, hitting above 300 right now, he can keep that trend going into this year and try and, cruise his way with the Twins to the playoffs potentially, because he could be a vital piece to their success. In addition to those young stars, they also have some very good experienced players, one of them being Nelson Cruz. And now Nelson Cruz is somebody who I think as time has gone on, I know I've said this before, he's aging like fine wine. He seems to just get better and better with age. He's off to a monster start this year. He's 40 years old. He's already had a 2-homer day on opening day. He's leading the Twins in batting so far this year, was one of their main options from the plate last year as well. Teams that have, this balance of old and young players mixed in with some good role players, they're the most dangerous. Like I said last time on the GSMC Baseball podcast, if you got old guys bringing up those younger talent and showing them how to be professionals, but then also those young guys trying to keep those older guys a little bit more youthful, and they've got to, keep them on their toes, if you will. As time goes on, you start to see the effects of that, and it's really an unbelievable turnout because teams can ultimately go all the way to the World Series, or go very far in the playoffs, at least with teams like that. Now, the number 2 team, some people may be shocked that I won't put the Indians here, but I think that the White Sox are the team to take that second place spot. They added some good pieces in the offseason, and they have some of their main offensive weapons returning to the team. Tim Anderson, who's coming off a ginormous year from the plate, returns for them, but he is off to a very, very slow start. And I know I'm going to get into it more about other guys that are also off to very slow starts, I should say. But again, can't factor that in all that much right now with, the season being a little bit over a week old at this point. If you start saying, oh, well, he's, coming off to a very slow start, he's not going to have a great year, you could be in for a rude awakening if you're another team come, game 40, game 45, because guys could very well start picking it up very soon. It's just a matter of, who's in that play form right now, who is in, the best shape, who's in the best condition, so on and so forth. But a name that I'm going to mention in the next segment, and a name that I'm probably going to, say much more often this year, and I think in general you're going to hear a lot more about, Johan Mankata. He came off to a very strong start this year. They also added Yasmani Grandal in the offseason, is a great catcher. Jose Abreu, who's a very young budding star, coming off a 33 home run, 123 RBI season. Johan Mankata is a name that people need to become familiar with, because I think he is one of the bright and shining stars, not only in the AL, but in the MLB. And, for the most part, Jose Abreu is the same way. I mean, if you're putting up 30-plus homers and 120-plus RBIs in a season, those are some impressive offensive numbers. And I mean, numbers that I don't think many people could really duplicate. He is struggling to begin the season, though, Jose Abreu, so that is something to watch for. And again, Anderson, not the greatest fielder, not a terrible fielder. He did rack up quite a bit of errors last year in the field. But if Anderson and Abreu can dig themselves out of the hole that they've started out in, and they have themselves, a much better season going forward, this White Sox team could be very, very dangerous. But Grandal is a great addition to this team, and I don't mean to go back to Grandal, but I mean, he's going to be a really great addition into that lineup. And like I keep mentioning, Mankata, in a couple years, he's going to absolutely flourish. Last year finished with a .315 average, 25 bombs, 79 RBIs, and it's going to be a great year for him. It's going to be a great, career for him. I think that he's going to have himself a very long-lasting career in the MLB. And, the potential amongst these players with Mankata, with Abreu, it's through the roof. And again, if Anderson and Abreu get out of their early slumps and Mankata keeps, that trend moving forward of how he's been playing in his career, this will be a team that can make a lot of noise in this division, not only for this year, but really for many years to come, in all honesty. I think it's a team that is setting itself up and has done a pretty good job at setting itself up for success now. They've gone through a little bit of a lull period the last couple years, but as we've, started to get into the 2020s now, they're starting to kind of pick it up a little bit. So we could definitely see them starting to become one of the better teams in the AL. Now, their pitching is a big question, as last year they had only one guy in their first 5 rotation that was able to hover around that 3 ERA mark, Lucas Giolito, who, he's a very good talent. Again, another great young addition on this team, and I think we're starting to see a little bit of a trend here. These teams that have these younger guys, they're able to go much further, in terms of how well they do in a couple years, not necessarily in the near future, but in the, long-standing future, next 3 years, 4 years. If they're able to keep these guys around for a long period of time, it's going to pay dividends for them. But they also added Dallas Keuchel, who's been an ace, if not a top 3 pitcher on the last 2 teams he's been on, both with the Braves and the Astros, a former Cy Young winner. So he is a big addition to their rotation. And if Keuchel can have a good year, and if Giolito, who's been rocked so far this year with over an astonishing 17 ERA. But again, we're very early on. He's pitched 1 or 2 games, so you cannot really base his performance this year off of just one outing. You can't do that. If they're able to really get it going and get it out of this slump, again, they're going to have a really great year. This is a great team on paper with the additions they've made and the returners they have. But if the guys who have struggled don't improve and they don't have a bounce back year this season, this team might slip below second. And I do genuinely believe, though, this team on paper can be a major threat to the Twins in this division. But that third place team, and I'm going to jump into them right now, they are going to be nipping at the White Sox heels all year long, and it has to be the Indians. And now I put them at third, but that doesn't mean I don't think that they could make the playoffs. Another team that in the last few years has seen a lot of improvement, and they came in second last year and finished in first the 2 years prior to 2019. So they have consistently found themselves in the top part of this division. However, like I mentioned about the White Sox, they added a lot of guys, and I feel that Cleveland didn't really do any spectacular moves in the offseason. They didn't lose anybody drastically, but they didn't add anybody drastically either. And so that's they're kind of in this little limbo stage, if you would. They didn't really do a whole lot. Now, they did lose Corey Kluber, one of their bigger aces that they've had in recent years, so that is definitely a big blow to their rotation, and I'll get into it later, though. They do have a very great budding rising star in Shane Bieber. Again, I'll get into him in a little bit. But Cleveland has come out to a pretty hot start early on, and again, it's early, so one minor bump in the road, they can drop 6 or 7 in a row, while the Twins and White Sox win a few games over that stretch, if they were to have a losing streak like that. And this division could look massively different than it does now. The Indians currently sit at first, but again, this could change. They've got guys that can put the bat on the ball consistently. Francisco Lindor being one of those guys. He's, struggled pretty early on, and a lot of these big-name guys that might struggle, we have to remember, these guys are rusty. They've hardly played any, in the last year and some change, and they haven't seen any action in terms of live game action. They're going to need a few days, maybe a week, to get back into the swing of things. But if this slump Lindor is on goes further than a week and stretches into 2 or 3 or even worse, 4 weeks, that could be a very worrisome sign for the Indians. Lindor being a 4-time All-Star, coming off a 32 home run year, hitting at least 30 or more in the last 3 seasons, a feat that is probably not going to be accomplished this season. And if it is, we will hear about that for probably months after the season. Again, with this shortened season, it's going to be very challenging for guys to hit 30-plus homers in a season, because they pretty much have to hit a home run every other game. And in logistics, that's very unrealistic. That's just very unrealistic and unlikely. And now in a 162-game season, yeah, totally different story. But again, we're playing in a different setup and a different situation this year. But, with Lindor's bat, you also have Jose Ramirez, another big bat in the lineup. One thing to make note of on Ramirez, you need to watch how he's progressed the last few years, or I should say digressed. His average has steadily dropped the last 3 years. He has had some solid OPS numbers, and he's off to a very impressive start this year. Pitching-wise now, they have one of the better up-and-coming guys, like I mentioned, in their rotation. Shane Bieber fanned an outstanding 14 batters coming off a year where he sat down 259 batters, an all-star last year as well. You mix in their dominating closer Brad Hand, who they acquired from the Padres a few seasons ago. The pitching and the hitting are definitely there for the Indians, but they're going to need their stars, who have started slow, like the White Sox situation, very similar to them, in order to try and come out of that, top 2 seeding. Now, again, this is a team that could very well, and like I'll mention, because it's now 8 teams in each division that make it, just because you're not in that first or second spot doesn't mean you couldn't be, one of those two other teams on the outside looking in and having a, although not an ideal spot in the playoffs, still a spot in the playoffs. They could be that team that's going to be in that 7th, 8th spot, if you will. I definitely could see them, they'll probably be out of that division. I think the AL Central is most likely to have a third team make the playoffs, as opposed to the other two divisions. Now, there obviously is going to be another division that has a third team, but I know that the AL Central is going to definitely be a division that is going to see at least 3 teams come out of it into the playoffs. Now, the 4th team I'm going to get into, the Detroit Tigers. And this is a franchise that, for me, growing up, it was a team that they were really good. I mean, Miguel Cabrera was in his heyday, when Jim Leyland was the manager and they were going to the World Series. They were a formidable opponent. They were a tough team to take on, and, in the postseason, they'd always do pretty well. As time has gone on, and as we kind of got into the 2010s, they started to have a little bit of a digression. And again, the Tigers, I think they have a long way to go as a whole. They have a good bit of young guys, though, between 24, 27-year-old guys that are, still have time to develop as a whole, but have done pretty well so far. Miguel Cabrera has some left in the tank, but again, he's only a fraction of a player that he used to be. I mean, he did hit pretty solidly last year in terms of his average, but it wasn't like the typical Miggy that we're used to seeing, winning batting titles and winning the Triple Crown and winning the MVP and this, that, and the other. He's still going to be a productive. I mean, he's very similar to how Albert Pujols is, right? Albert Pujols and Miguel Cabrera both kind of soared to the top, very similar time, maybe a little bit of a couple years separated the two. But again, they're still guys that, even though they're up in age and they're starting to get a little bit older, they can still produce. They can still go up to the plate, and that just goes to show you what kind of professional hitters they are. I mean, that's a huge sign that if you're, mid to later 30s and you're still able to hit, for a solid 280 average. I mean, he hovered around 280 or so last year. So he can definitely put the ball in play still. Now, this was a huge loss for them in the offseason. Losing Nick Castellanos, I think, was a really, really rough loss for them. One of the best double hitters in the game, a great extra base hitter. I mean, he's been off to a kind of a slow start, but he did pick it up the other day. He had a big grand slam. I mean, he could definitely well be a very, very, great weapon if he was still with the Tigers. Problem is, he's not. So they're gonna be without him this year, and I think that is going to be definitely a big, big blow to their entire lineup and their hitting, really. And they're off to an okay start so far this year, but will they be able to keep that going throughout this year? Probably not. I really don't see it happening. And again, to any Tigers fans out there, I don't mean any disrespect, but I just really don't see how Detroit is going to be able to get themselves into a legitimate role and a legitimate kind of winning way, if you will, this season, especially with how short the season is. Again, they're off to a pretty good start, but can they keep this momentum going? This is a team that in the past few years has struggled mightily. I mean, one of the 2 worst teams in baseball last year, they didn't even amass 50 wins as a team. Now, if they had the win total that they had last year, which was 47, this year, they would probably be walking their way right to Game 1 of the World Series, but that is not the case. If you had 47 wins this year, that'd be great. Having 47 wins in any other year is despicable, is laughable, is almost unheard of, really. If you are any big baseball nut out there that knows a whole lot about baseball and loves baseball, I think everybody can agree. In a normal 162-game season, if you're winning 47 games, you are way behind the 8 ball. They have had a few guys on this year's team that have had pretty solid starts to the year. Center fielder Jacoby Jones, he had a really good year last year, already registering over an 1,100 OPS. Their leadoff hitter, Austin Romine, approaching that 1,000 OPS level as well, which to have a leadoff guy hitting that well and being able to get on base that consistently, I mean, that's really good. That's a great sign because at least you can get that guy on base in some fashion, and it'll make it so much easier for those 2, 3, 4, 5 hole hitters to try and drive that run in. Now, I'm going to move into the pitching because the pitching is a head-scratcher. No real threats. Nothing really to be afraid of if you are any team, not even in the AL Central, even in the NL Central, which I will get to for next Tuesday's episode. But, I mean, if you're anybody in the MLB, I would not be afraid of this pitching. I mean, Spencer Turnbull, he seems to be having a much better season than, last year where he led the MLB in losses with 17. So, again, that's another sign. If you've got one of your guys in the rotation losing even 10 or more games, even 8 or more games, and you're not having a winning record, that's not a good sign because A, those are losses in your loss column, but B, it means you just don't really have I don't want to say the faith in that pitcher, but that going into it, there might be a possibility that they could get rocked or they could lose or what have you. So, again, 17 losses a year ago, not a great sign. He has started off much better, and he has bounced back incredibly from that. They also have Joe Jimenez moving to a more consistent and permanent closing role as opposed to last year. He's done all right so far. We'll see how his adjustment to a permanent ninth inning role will pay off for the Tigers in the long run. Something to make note of is how he keeps his walks down, which is, as a closer, is a fantastic sight to see. Walked only 23 guys last year in 66 appearances and struck out 82, which was the highest amongst their relief guys. So he does have that capability of limiting teams' chances at any sort of comeback. This team hasn't finished above 500 since 2016. So if we are looking at it how they started already, if they can continue this ball rolling, maybe they can find themselves in the third spot. I don't think that they could really crack the top two, but with the knowing that if you're out ahead and you can get through the relief pitching a little bit, knowing that going into the ninth inning, if you are up and you are the Tigers and you have Joe Jimenez coming to the mound to pitch for you, I think that is a pretty solid sign and a good inclination that he could very well not only, prevent any sort of comeback, but ultimately get a win for you guys. So I do think that they could maybe make a case for third place, but I think that, Detroit, it's going to be a team that we will talk about more and more down the road because I think that they've got a lot of young talent that is just now starting to develop. But as of right now, I think it's going to be an uphill battle for this team for this season for sure. Now, finishing it out at the bottom fifth spot has to be the Kansas City Royals. They have come out to a horrendous start. Especially with the bats, they have 6 of their 9 starting batters hitting sub 200. So if you've got 6 of your 9 guys hitting below the Mendoza line, then you are in big trouble for the rest of the year, especially with a year like this where it's going to be very hard for guys to get themselves out of any sort of, holes, hitting slumps, whatever you want to call it, because you have a very limited amount of time. You've got a very small window. And if you don't take advantage of that window, it's going to be, like I mentioned for the Tigers, an uphill climb. Now, they already, a week into the season, that's even another more frightening thing, is that they're a week into the season, that they've already got guys that are hitting below 200. As they get closer to that 60-game mark, that's going to be, something to look at in terms of their team hitting, their individual player hitting. How are they going to get that to go back up into, a relative, acceptable level, if you will, an acceptable range for a batting average? They finished second to last in the division last year with winning only 59 games and losing 103 games. Now, they do have some pretty solid players on their team, one of them being Salvador Perez, who's been a very steady player for them, been a great leader for them in the past couple of years, six-time All-Star. Again, very seasoned, very successful, and you surround him with a lot of talent. I think that they could be really good, but the problem is there's not a whole lot of talent to surround him with right now. Now, very solid second baseman in Whit Merrifield. This is a name that I'm going to get into in my fourth segment. He is going to be a player to watch. I think that everybody should make note of him. And honestly, again, I'll mention this later, but he should be somebody that if he was on another team, a Yankees, an Angels, Red Sox, just a team that is much more notable than the Kansas City Royals, I think that we would hear way more about him. Batted a team-high .302 for the Royals last year, coming out to a very hot start, hitting right at that 400 mark for at least, floating around it. So another good, solid piece in the lineup. But again, there isn't a whole lot of other options on this team. They've started to rebuild, a little bit since their mid-2010s back-to-back runs to the World Series, winning in 2015. But since then, they have slowly started to decline, and you can totally see it. If you look back at their season win totals from 2015 to now, it just gradually decreases each and every year. But they have some promising young guys coming back through the farm system, so they do have something to look forward to, but they have to go through that restart process. But they are they're a prime example of a team that, they saw that window of opportunity that they had to win. They took advantage of it, and now they have a World Series title and 2 straight pennants because of it. So, they will most likely, again, not finish close to 500, I think, but this could be a team that over time, and as we start moving forward in a couple years down the road, they could very well slowly start to climb their way back up and actually be another legitimate contender. So that's how I see the AL Central shaking out. Stay tuned for next week's episode on Tuesday when I'm back sharing my breakdown of the NL Central and how I see that division playing out. It's going to be a really interesting year for that division with how evenly balanced those teams are, not to mention just like their counterpart in the AL. That'll close things out for our third segment here. Thanks for sticking around and tuning into the GSMC Baseball Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcasting Network. We're going to take a quick break here, folks, but don't change that channel. We've got a great final segment for you as I'll be sharing my 10 players to watch in this shortened season and who I think could have a really monumental year if things go their way. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and thanks for sticking around for the fourth and final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still here, and in our last segment, I jumped into the breakdown and prediction of this year's AL Central. I shared which teams are going to land in the final standings and how I see the division really shaking out this year. In our final segment here today, I'm going to share 10 players who I think are big players to keep an eye on for this season that could take advantage of the shortened season, but could also have a breakout year that completely changes their career trajectory. I'll get into it with my first player I think people need to watch and keep an eye out for, and that is Dansby Swanson. He's the first player I could see having a huge breakout year, 26-year-old shortstop, ton of pop in his bat, and a very solid fielder as well, only committing 12 errors on the season last year. He has the potential to be really good this year. I mean, he has struggled some in previous years. I mean, he's batted .251 or worse between 2017 and 2019 and hasn't had an 800 or higher OPS since his rookie year where he only played 38 games. Now, this year is a totally different story. He has jumped over 300 percentage points for his OPS, already has 7 RBIs and counting. He is in a great point of his career where he is starting to find his rhythm as a player and is primed for, really a huge year. He is a huge strikeout guy, though, and this was a really big concern for me, especially with his ability as a power-hitting shortstop. He has struck out almost half the time he has been up to bat this year and has amassed over 120 strikeouts each of the last 3 seasons. However, if he keeps those strikeout numbers down and brings up his walks and his on-base percentage, he's going to be even more of a threat from the plate than he already has been so far this season. I mean, he could really be a player that I think we will talk about as one of the more dominant shortstops in the league for years to come. I mean, he's a highly touted guy coming out of college, coming through the farm system. A lot of publicity kind of came with him coming into his MLB career for sure, because again, he was just so highly touted as a recruit and as a talent, really. So that's my first guy that I think could really be a big time go-to guy this year, especially for the Braves. Another player to keep an eye on is Nick Castellanos. Big pickup in the offseason for Cincinnati that, I think they could finally have that big year, and he's been building up, for this, moment in his career personally. I mean, he's been building up for a big moment. I think the Reds have been building up for a big moment. So I think it's, perfect timing, a perfect storm, if you will, to have Castellanos come on the Reds when they add Moustakas as well. Again, they're a team, like I mentioned in the third segment. The Royals, they took advantage of that window of time to win, and I think the Reds are a team that is very similar to that right now. They're in that window, they're in that time frame, and I think they're trying to act as quickly as possible. Now, Castellanos is coming off a career year where he had a career-high 863 OPS percentage, was a midseason pickup by the Cubs last year, and man, did he make his presence known in that lineup. Led the MLB in doubles last year and has hit 20-plus homers the last 3 seasons. He's only 2 years older than Swanson, so he's 28 years old. He could have a year that catapults him to a bigger conversation of big-time power hitters in the league that, what would normally be a normal conversation of, Mike Trout, Bryce Harper, now you starting to throw in DJ LeMahieu, Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton. You might start to see a couple years down the road, 2, maybe 3 years, Nick Castellanos' name starting to be thrown into that mix with those guys because he does have that capability of being a big-time power hitter. Again, another big strikeout guy, though, has had between 140 and 150 strikeouts the last 4 of 5 years, so he's another guy that, if he keeps those strikeout numbers low, he can really drive up his value even more in the lineup. He has a huge addition. He was a huge addition to this Reds team. I mean, I remember when the news broke that he was coming, to the Reds, and I have got a good friend of mine who is a huge fan of Nick Castellanos. I mean, almost every time that there's ever any sort of replay on and we're watching, SportsCenter or just baseball in general, and Nick Castellanos does something, he always makes a point of it. So Castellanos is a guy that a lot of people are starting to take note of, and they're starting to really pay attention to, what he's able to do. Again, I think what was, really unfortunate for him in his career was being on a Detroit Tigers team that didn't really have a whole lot of notoriety or really any sort of backing, if you will. And as a result, Castellanos kind of, I don't want to say he fell to the wayside, but he kind of got lost in the mix of everything because, again, another guy that's just another really good hitter, he's just going to, blend in with everything else. But if he's a guy that sticks out, he's on a really good team, he puts up some sort of, big-time numbers in some sort of capacity, he's a guy that could very well, again, be, maybe even in the MVP discussion. I don't know if that's a little bit of a bold take or not, but, again, he has so much room to grow and continue to improve, and I think really this is the year that it's going to be the year of Nick Castellanos. So he's another guy I would say keep a very keen eye out for because he could have himself an unbelievable season. Now, this next player is really one of the brightest young stars in the majors, coming off a massive rookie year, and that is Fernando Tatis Jr. Unbelievable year last year, batted .317, had a .969 OPS, 22 homers. The guy had himself a year last season, without a doubt. He's come out to a very monster start this season with over an 1,000 OPS, similar batting average, hitting over 300 this year as well. So, again, he's starting to build off of the year that he had last year, and that is starting to kind of bubble to the surface, really. Some of these guys that had big-time years last year, they've come out to very, very slow starts. Like I mentioned before, Tim Anderson, he's a prime example. Huge year last year, come out to a very slow start. So if you're a guy that had a really good year last year and you're able to jump on the ball like you have the first week and a half or so of the season, like Fernando Tatis Jr. has, it's going to be smooth sailing for you the rest of the way because I really think that first week and a half, 2 weeks, that's, what you're going to call getting over the hump for these guys because, they haven't played in over a year. They haven't seen any actual, they've seen some live pitching, but they haven't seen live pitching from other teams really hardly at all since last season. So, again, if you're looking at it from that point of view, and that standpoint, this is a year that Fernando Tatis Jr. could really make a little bit of separation between him and some other younger players in the MLB, really. Because, again, he's coming off to a very similar start that he had last year. He's starting to really get the ball rolling. 21 years old. He has an entire career ahead of himself. And, again, for the Padres, that's a fantastic sign. With their incredible farm system, they keep some key players, on the team now. Tatis could find himself being that centerpiece for the Padres to really build around and really try to form a legitimate squad with him as the main focus because their farm system is, every single time I've ever read any sort of MLB farm system rankings, they are consistently in the top 5 each and every article I've ever read. So they've got a lot of guys in the works in their farm system, in the minors, that are continuing to get better, and they're starting to show. Fernando Tatis, he's a perfect example of somebody who's, risen through the ranks, and now he's, bursting onto the scene, really. If he can have the year that he had last year, if not better, then this Padres team, they may, find themselves fighting for a potential playoff spot come fall time. Now, this next guy, I know I've mentioned this player many times, and again, it shows how much I really believe he could have a monumental year for, his career and for his team. That's Mitch Garver. I mean, the Twins catcher is coming off a huge year. Batted .273 last year with a .995 OPS, and, with these big numbers and these huge stats, not to mention 31 home runs last year, again, he's capable of it. He has the ability to do it. It is very attainable for him to do. And if he can be a consistent 30-plus homer guy, especially as a catcher, that is going to be a ginormous asset for the Twins as they get closer and closer into the playoffs. Now, as a general rule, again, your catcher isn't necessarily a huge hitter in the lineup. I'm not saying that you can't be a good hitter if you're a catcher. I'm just saying that they definitely aren't a ton of catchers out there hitting 30-plus bombs very frequently. So to have him in your lineup to add to all the other pieces that they have already, I mean, again, the sky's the limit for this team. And to have a kind of like this secret weapon, if you will, with Mitch Garver, teams have to really take into consideration that Garver is a threat from the plate. I mean, most teams might say, hey, we got through that first, 6 or whatever, we don't have to worry about anybody else. But if you put him in that 6th spot, or that 7th spot, or 8th spot, you're just, that's actually a great sign for your team that you've got depth that goes that far down in the batting lineup. Again, he's off to a very slow start this year. It's still relatively early, like I keep saying, so he does have time to make it up, and batting, a mere 200, striking out in half of his at-bats so far, I mean, that needs to be toned down. That definitely needs to be toned down, and his batting average needs to be picked back up. He is very capable of it, not to mention he had a over 600 slugging percentage last year. So he's capable of getting on base, getting big hits, getting in scoring position for a team that is already loaded as it is. So I think Garver will pick it up as the season goes on and really have a profound impact on this team this year. Brian Reynolds. That's a name that everybody must remember, because I really do believe we are going to watch the progression and the ascension of one of the best outfielders, young outfielders in the MLB right now. And he could very well become one of the best outfielders in the MLB, period. So, again, a guy coming, for me, living in the city of Pittsburgh, I'm, very attuned to what's going on with the Pirates. I've got a lot of friends that are big Pirates fans. I've got a lot of friends that are big Brian Reynolds fans. And even when he was coming up through the rankings and coming up through the minors, people were kind of like, who is this guy? He batted really well in their AAA team, but again, he kind of wasn't, on anybody's radar. And then all of a sudden last year, he bats over 300, has an unbelievable year, came out of nowhere. And I know how much he's cherished as a player on this Pirates team, and especially by the fans. And I think that's another big thing that, in the city of champions and in a big city, a big sports city like Pittsburgh, if you're able to get the approval of the fans as a player, you're doing a pretty good job. Again, Reynolds had an unbelievable year last year, batted .314, which was good for 10th in the MLB, had an .880 OPS, pretty much led the Pirates in every major statistical category, for the Pirates in terms of hitting. Big doubles hitter also, which is a great sign if you're Pittsburgh, because you want to have those guys that can get those extra base hits. Josh Bell, another big extra base hit guy. So if you're able to get some of those guys on base, and then some of these, other, I don't want to say, not as talented hitters, but not as dominant hitters and not as impactful hitters, if you will. If you can get those guys to drive in those runs, and even these guys that have, big, extra base hitting numbers or big doubles numbers, home run numbers, whatever, if you can get them to drive each other in, it's a good sign. And especially for a team like the Pirates that have struggled massively in the last couple years. I mean, last year they had one of the biggest downfalls I think I've ever seen in an MLB team in the second half of the season. So if they're able to get things going, and again, they've got a lot of other issues, the bullpen, they've kind of got some problems there. Their starting pitching is, not awful, but it's not unbelievable. They've got some good weapons, but they've got some pretty decent hitting. From everything that I've watched so far this year, they've got some pretty decent hitting. They've got some guys that definitely can get it done from the plate. So, I mean, having Reynolds back, finished 4th in the league in Rookie of the Year voting last year. He's hungry to have a big year this year. Again, off to a slow start, but what I'm starting to see is a lot of these big name guys, and like I keep saying, they're starting off slow, which I figure is, again, simply out of guys being out of shape, being rushed back into it, not have enough time to prepare, so on and so forth. So Brian Reynolds is a guy that I think everybody needs to be, very attuned to what is going on with him in his career. Also an unbelievable outfielder. I mean, I was watching the games the last couple of days. My team, the Brewers, were in town, and so I, obviously was watching it, and he hosed a couple guys from left field. I mean, there was one play where he absolutely rifled Ryan Braun from left field all the way at home. Ryan Braun tagged up on a sac fly, and he tried to score. Now, again, Ryan Braun is not as quick as he once was, but, it was a pretty, I don't want to say bang-bang play, but there was a good step or so that throw beat Braun, and it was on a line. So having a guy that not only does it from the plate, but also, from the field and in the field and with the glove, that's another huge sign if you are the Pirates. The next guy, I've already mentioned him, and I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on him because I'm giving credit where credit is due, and that's Whit Merrifield. That's a name, again, you may or may not know. Being on the Royals doesn't necessarily help his cause, but the 31-year-old righty had a heck of a year last year. Batted .302 with 16 bombs and 74 RBIs, not to mention an .811 OPS. So someone who may be one of these players that has started to ascend at a later part of his career, came out into the league at an older age, around 27 years old. So, he's coming off an all-star year, though, and career highs in hits with 206, which led the league in, at-bats with 681, which he led the league in, triples with 10, which he led the league in, and games played with 162, which he led the league in. So that is beyond a career year. I mean, that is a year that I think puts you on a much higher pedestal than he probably was on before. So they've got I mean, the guy has dominated. I mean, the last year or so, he's definitely put himself on the scene. He's definitely brought himself onto the map in terms of, what baseball players and what hitters to really make note of if you're a pitcher or if you're another team. And if you've got a guy that's having a great year, you need to talk about him and be recognized. And I was really happy to see that he made an all-star game, but still, if a guy is putting up, unbelievable numbers, putting on a clinic of, a season like that he did last year, he should be talked about nonstop. And the fact that, we, at least for me, I hardly heard about him. I never really, heard anything about him on TV, any of the announcers, anybody on ESPN, Get Up, First Take, whatever. I never heard much about him. And to have a year like that, again, I think that there should be a little bit more publicity, if you will, in his direction. Again, he's off to another hot start, having an average, hovering between 350, 400 range right now, and he's already had, a few homers as well. So he's a player that is waiting for that year, really, that, puts him on the map. And even though he is in his 30s now, a lot of these guys are able to play well into their 30s. That's the great thing about baseball, is that it's really, it's hard on your body, but it's not like running up and down a basketball court however hundreds of times every single night for 9 months out of the year. Or it's not like getting banged up against the boards in hockey for months at a time. This is a sport that you can play a little bit further into your life. Now, it's a matter of can your coordination and can your timing and your bat speed and everything else stay up to par and really stay up with everybody else in the league. So will he start to falter? I don't think so, because I think if you're starting to peak at this time, I think it's only up from here. And again, if he's a guy that's on the Yankees, on the Dodgers, they talk about him nonstop. He would probably be one of the biggest talked about names in, baseball. I really genuinely believe that, especially with the year he had last year. If he was on a team like the Yankees or Dodgers, the publicity and the notoriety he would have gotten would have been through the roof. So hopefully he can keep up this play for this season, but I think he could definitely start to really pick it up and make a little bit more noise for himself overall in his career, especially if he has another monster year this year. Now, a player I mentioned some earlier in the show in my last segment, it's got to be Johan Mankata. You've got to bring up Johan because he is an unbelievable talent, and not to mention he's got so much potential. He's already made a drastic improvement in really just a year. In 2018 he hit .235. Last year he hit .315, 25 homers, and 79 RBIs. So not only has he improved those numbers, he's also dropped his strikeout numbers drastically between those 2 years, going from 217 total strikeouts in 2018 to 154 in 2019. So you're knocking off not quite 100, or, probably, I'm not good at quick math. So 60, maybe 70 or so strikeouts in a year. That's a great improvement, and that's a great number to dwindle down because, again, if you're a big power number guy, you don't want to be striking out a whole lot. You want to if I'm a manager and if I'm a coach, and I've got a guy like Johan Mankata on my team, and he's a big power guy, or even someone like Jose Abreu, or somebody like, Miguel Sano, who we've already mentioned, so on and so forth. If you're getting outs by putting the ball in play, I'm not mad about that, especially with the day and age baseball's at right now with how it's, really emphasizing driving in runs, getting guys on base, and moving them over, getting them into scoring position. I really don't see any problem with if a guy's going to get out, at least he's putting it in play. If you're going to go up to the plate and you're going to strike out, especially striking out looking, that should not happen. That should not happen at all. And again, if he continues to drop those strikeout numbers, the average will keep climbing, and it's already shown. He's drastically cutting those numbers, improving those numbers. He's doing all the right things to really add up for an unbelievable year. He's off to an even better start this year. He's floating around with a 400 batting average right now through the first week and a half, and he's also got an over 1,000 OPS on the year so far. So again, he's got all the makings to have a really big year. And with him being 25, there's no slowing him down. He's only going to get better from here. If he can stay out of the top 10 in strikeout percentage, which he did find himself last year, ending the year in 9th, again, he can produce so much for his team from the plate that could really launch them into the postseason. Now, the next name I want to get into, Marcus Simeon. He's a guy that you might not, again, be familiar with, but he's coming off a year where he received votes for the MVP. He finished 2019 actually batting 33 home runs, 92 RBIs. So, again, another 30-plus homer, just about 100 RBI guy on a team. That is very hard to find. And if you're able to get that on your roster and you're able to have him stay healthy and stay consistent, it's smooth sailing for you. And again, this year, another slow start is another guy that is, kind of slowly gotten things going a little bit, but if he starts to, pick it back up, he can hit an upward tick, and he could really catch fire this season. He's done a nice job of keeping the strikeout numbers down, and, for the most part, he didn't have a drastic drop-off in the strikeout numbers like Johan Mankata did, but he did drop it down from, 131 in 2018 to 102 strikeouts in 2019, so, a big difference. That's obviously still a big difference. Not the drastic difference that Mankata had, but it's still an improvement nonetheless. 29 years old, so a lot of room still to improve for him to get better. Again, he doesn't have the room that like Mankata or Dansby Swanson might have, or Fernando Tatis at that, but he could still have a very productive career, still produce very well. And again, the team that he's on is a perfect team to be on if you're a guy that is trying to, develop your skills and develop your talent. Like I mentioned, the A's are one of the best at developing talent, like the Padres, like the Royals. They're really good with their farm system. They're really good with guys, in their, in-house, if you will, in their system, in their minors. Now, it's not a very large payroll team, so if you're an A's fan and you're looking at it that way, yes, that could be a little bit of a worry because Simeon could decide, hey, if I have another 2-3 big years, I'm going to want a lot of money, and they can't pay him that. So if I was the A's, I would try and hold on to him as long as I could, and, theoretically speaking, even if you had to get rid of him, because you couldn't pay him or whatever, you could definitely get some very good pieces for him. You could definitely get some really good, maybe young pieces to start to rebuild, or some really solid, already established players potentially. So we'll see what happens with Simeon as his career continues to progress, but I definitely think that this year could be a huge payoff year for him. Now, next guy I want to get into, Eugenio Suarez. He's arguably one of the best big-time power-hitting shortstops, third basemen in the league, by far. He's coming off a year where he hit 271. Yeah, not a great average, but again, average is not really looked at how it was, at least when I was growing up for the most part. And I think that when you factor in now, it's more of a power-hitting game. You want guys that are getting on base. You want guys that are going to get you extra base hits, high OPSs. The batting average, if it's around 270, a couple years ago, that was okay, but now that's actually pretty good, especially if you're a big power-hitting guy, and let me tell you what, he is exactly that. 49 home runs last year, 103 RBIs, so not only a 30-plus homer, 100-plus RBI guy, he's a 40-plus homer, 100 plus RBI guy. This guy's got a ton of pop in his bat, and last year he really proved it. I mean, this year has been an absolute struggle for him, though, and he has the capability of having a huge, year, being a huge home run guy, really just an offensive weapon overall for the Reds. An all-star in 2018, had a league-high 189 strikeouts last year. So like a lot of these big power hitters, he has a high strikeout total because of the aggression at the plate. So if he can manage that for the rest of the year, I mean, he's, so far kept it pretty minimal, only 5 strikeouts through, about 20 plate appearances as of today. So still not great, but definitely an improvement. And it is a sign that the outs he's getting are contact outs, making contact, whether it's flying out, grounding out, whatever. And like I mentioned, if I'm a manager, I am very happy about that, because at least I know that if you're at least putting it in play, you're going to, at the bare minimum, I'd hope, move somebody over, maybe at the best, score a run. So just getting the ball in play is the bare minimum. And if you can keep those strikeout numbers down and really drive up those walk numbers, especially for Suarez, I think he's going to have a ginormous year. So now I'm going to move over to someone from the mound who I think is going to be, really a great pitcher. I think he's going to be a great pitcher. Kind of a slow start, if you will, for his career. Kind of started to bud a little bit later on. But again, someone from the mound that I definitely think could have a lot of noise, and that is Sonny Gray. I mean, he comes in this year with a 200-plus strike, or coming off a 200-plus strikeout year, sub 3 ERA, and an 11-8 record last year. He can get it done. I mean, he really can. Off to a great start. Already has had a 10K outing on Wednesday against the Cubs, and below a 1 ERA this year as well, coming off an all-star year. Only gave up 68 walks last year as well. So a low walk guy and a high strikeout guy, 68 walks as opposed to 259 strikeouts. That's an unbelievable ratio. And if you're a starting pitcher, and especially on a team like the Reds, again, they're adding those pieces, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be those big-time, massive names like a Bryce Harper or a Aaron Judge that they're going to win with. I think it's going to be guys like Mike Moustakas, who's been on similar teams like the Reds, in previous years. He's won a World Series with the Royals. He's been on an NL Central Division champion Brewers team. So he gets that mid-market feel. He gets that, kind of middle-of-the-road payroll idea. And same thing with Sonny Gray. And a lot of these guys, they're not superstars, they're all-stars, and they get the job done. So Sonny Gray is another guy I think is going to have a really big year. Now, my final player that I think everyone needs to watch out for, Shane Bieber. I mean, pitcher for the Cleveland Indians, coming off a monster season, struck out, again, 259 batters, 3.28 ERA. This year's off to a very similar start. I mean, he's already had a 14K 6-inning performance, registered a win in that game as well. He was an all-star last year like Gray, so he's in a prime for a big year, especially with a huge first outing of the season. That's a great sign for the Indians as a team. And again, they're going to need the best pitching that they can get, with the Twins and the White Sox both battling it out for that top spot. And if they want to make any sort of noise, he's really got to be a big help on the mound, but their bats also have to show up and play each and every day. Again, a guy that's a consistent above 500 winning pitcher. He's coming off a 15-8 year. The year before that, an 11-5 year. So, again, a really, really good winning pitcher. And very similar to how Gray is, Bieber kept his strikeout to walk ratio numbers pretty, opposite-ended, if you will. I mean, 259 Ks to only 40 walks last year. That's unbelievable. And this guy, I mean, he's got the numbers, he's got the credentials, and he's got the potential to have a really, really big year. So that's going to wrap it up for us here today on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Those are my 10 players to check out, so be sure to keep an eye out on all of them. And it was really great having you all tune in with me today. I'm really excited to keep bringing you anything and everything baseball related. And, now a week into the season, we have a lot to look forward to. Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that would be much appreciated, and we look forward to continuing to give you all the latest and greatest episodes and content about this season moving forward. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.